wherever you are dialing in from. We are so excited to have you all here this morning, or as I said, this afternoon or this evening, depending where in the world you are from. And first of all, to Professor Vilakazi, our Vice Chancellor and Principal, thank you so very much for gracing us with your presence this morning. It is indeed a great privilege to have you speak to us today at our Africa Evaluation INDABA. To our esteemed panelists, colleagues, and of course to all of you, our participants, a very, very warm welcome. Thank you for choosing to be here today. Of the myriad opportunities to be elsewhere, this is where you have chosen to spend your time, and we are grateful for your presence here today, each and every one of you. So when planning any event, including this one, or considering attending any event, I'm sure that you, like me, consider carefully the value of another discussion. So over the last 2 years, we've seen an explosion of online webinars, and as institutions and also as individuals, when invited to speak, we are now challenged to ask ourselves, why this occasion? It is quite obvious, though, that the world is in crisis and that transformative change is needed at scale. So the substance of our INDABA is therefore not insignificant, particularly the discussions scheduled for this week, such as the inclusion of environmental sustainability, gender equity, and indigenization into our evaluation practice towards impactful decision-making by policymakers and program implementers. However, beyond that, there are seemingly intangible benefits of communing together in the way we'll be doing this week. So perhaps we can lean on the work of science communication researchers who have increasingly shifted their focus to participatory science education. So several sessions at the online Public Communication of Science and Technology 2020+1 conference in May 2021 specifically focused on the transformation potential of participation in science or science communication. So what does this have to do with our webinar today? And in fact, this entire week? Well, the science communication community has found that when we change the way we tell stories, when we provide spaces for trusted relationships to develop, and when we enable and enact inclusive participation, we can drive the transformation agenda forward. So the very word INDABA, an Nguni word that is rooted in the notion of deep dialogue about important matters, is where we land today. I trust that you will see this as so much more than just another webinar series, but as a moment that propels us forward towards action and transformation as we continue to commune and converse and engage about the critical matters facing humanity at this moment in time, and as evaluators, how each of us will contribute to changing the world for the better. At this point, let me also just do a little bit of housekeeping. So we do have French translation available. So if you go toggle to the bottom of your screen, you'll find a globe and it says interpretation. And if you click on that, you will then have French interpretation. And then what will happen as well is throughout the course of the morning as well, we will just have a reminder to everybody as new people to join us. So please do feel free to click on French interpretation if needs be. It is my great honor and privilege now to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Professor Zeblan Vilakazi. Truth be told, Prof, our whole team has been so excited and dare I say nervous to have you here today. It's such a privilege. As you know, you are our leader of leaders at WITS in the WITS community, and we hold you in high esteem. So colleagues, please allow me to read to you a very brief summary of Prof's bio. Of course, there is much more that we're not going to be reading out, but here is a brief one. Professor Zeblan Vilakazi is the Vice Chancellor of the University of the Witwatersrand. He was instrumental in establishing South Africa's first experimental high-energy physics research group at CERN, working on the Large Hadron Collider. Vilakazi has fostered international collaborative research as director of Itemba Labs, the largest cyclotron facility in the Southern Hemisphere, where he initiated a flagship rare isotope beam RIB project. In 2019, he played a role in securing a place for African academic partners in the development of practical applications through access to the IBM Quantum Computing Network. In May 2022, Professor Zeblan Vilakazi was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society in the UK. A warm round of virtual applause as we welcome to the floor. Vilakazi, over to you. Thank you so much. And you are still on mute, Prof. It happens to all of us.
Apologies. I think I've been out of the online sessions for much too long now. I actually had more real-time face-to-face analog meetings than the digital ones. So I have to get used to muting and unmuting, which I think is a sign of better things to come, that this becomes almost alien. The more alien it becomes, the better. But I think sometimes, of course, one has to be practical about transitioning between both modes because of take advantage of the learnings of the last teachings of the last 2 years. Thank you for your kind words, Dr. Candice Morkel, the moderator and director of the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results Anglophone Africa. Professor Bagele Chilisa, scholar and evaluator of the University of Botswana. Professor Zenda Ofir, I knew of her before I joined the then FRD. It shows how far I've been in the system. A scientist, an independent evaluator, and one of the titans of South African science system who played a pivotal role in that regard. Professor Ian Goldman, the president of the International Evaluation Academy, and other roles as a visiting adjunct professor at several universities here in South Africa and across the world. Jennifer Mutua, independent evaluator, legacy board member of the African Evaluation Association and Evaluation Society of Kenya. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, messieurs, dames, merci de votre attention pour mon présentation ici. Okay, I'll switch back to English. Africa holds a magnificent potential for the 1.2 billion people who call this their home. This is despite the challenges that we face, particularly in the context of the multiple intersection crises of the Anthropocene. The undisputable climate crisis has placed the whole world, given the current discussions taking place in Egypt, that the world is in a critical moment of urgency, where all humanity, from every continent, every country, whichever sector, needs to act decisively to deal with this exponential. I think we are facing two exponentials. One is the digital exponential, and the other one is the climate exponential, which has reached crisis level. I mean, all graphs and indicators show that we are now at a hockey stick kind of non-linear level, where these changes are beginning to have an exponential on us. The environmental disasters that we've recently observed, such as the floods in Pakistan, the Hurricane Ian in Florida, USA, as well as the various droughts and heat waves experienced in Europe over the past summer, and indeed our crisis of flooding on the eastern seaboard of South Africa in the Durban area, make us echo the words of President William Ruto, President of Kenya, who at the recent COP27 climate crisis in Kenya posited as thus, I quote, "In the face of impending catastrophe, those warning signs are already unbearably disastrous. Weak action is unwise. Indeed, taking no action is dangerous," close quote. So what President Ruto said here is that the impending calamitous impact of climate change, blended with the serious gaps in education, health skills, and persistent challenges such as conflict, food insecurity, poverty, place us at a key developmental risk. Compounding the crisis is the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to this region's first recession in 25 years, after many years of incredible growth. Obviously, all the public vulnerabilities were exacerbated, disproportionately affected the most vulnerable groups of society, such as the poor, women, and the youth, and those who work in the formal sector. We, as people who have worked in science, take pride in the achievements of science, the ability to split the atom, the landing of the humankind on the moon and the recent surgeon to the moon and beyond by Artemis, our ability to do genetic coding, do some cloning, advance human health, and many others are still undergirded by the fact that despite all these technical achievements, human beings still cannot resolve basic things like care for each other, care for the environment, and also avoid unnecessary conflict, as President Arato said, that results in human strife. So therefore, even our advances in the world of science, of building advanced accelerators, has not helped us address some of the most basic things. So this notwithstanding, the recent commitments of COP27 this year have led me to believe that there is hope. In addition, many of the commitments and impassioned pleas for action made by world leaders and others at the summit within the EU and the African continent, which pledged a new Team Europe initiative on climate change, adaptation, and resilience in Africa as part of the EU-Africa Global Gateway Investment Package. Included in more than 1.7 billion euro package of climate change adaptation programs is a 60 million euro set aside from the overall EU contribution for loss and damage. Indeed, one of the key pillars of this initiative, one of the 4 pillars in this initiative, the 2 that I'd like to point out in that regard this morning resonate with the work, particularly of Clear AA adverts in our quest to get better evidence-led policy making, leading towards better development outcomes. I'll name just 2 pillars. The first being in reinforcing early warning systems at regional, national levels, and thereby strengthening governance, promoting risk-informed decisions in line with the UN initiative on early warning systems for all, as unveiled in the UN Secretary General's Guterres at COP27. Secondly, and closely related pillar is in supporting climate risk data collection and aggregation and analysis to improve the relevant decision-making processes. Both these pillars seek to speak to the importance of effective monitoring and evaluation systems, essential for the effective evidence-based public policy making, and this hinges on the availability and use of robust evidence upon which decisions can be taken. In times of crisis, these decision-making processes and evidence-based systems need to be agile, robust, efficient, and timeless, given the many moving systems in this machine. All institutions whose mandate it is to ensure the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this includes governments, the private and civil society, the intelligentsia, must prioritize the building and strengthening of systems that will address the effectiveness of policy decisions and programs that monitor progress towards these goals. And of course, let's not forget that the long-term goal that Africa has set upon itself and it needs to realize is that of the Agenda 2063, which is a specific continental plan for the development of our continent. The need for robust, meaningful, and timeless evidence is what we need to course correct and accelerate progress towards building back better in the light of the global and existential crisis brought about by climate change that we face. Addressing both the protracted developmental challenges plaguing the continent and other countries in the global south, and indeed countries in the global north, we need strong monitoring. We need strong evaluation systems more than ever. The work of Clear AA, therefore, is nestled within the first vision that we are crafting and finalizing now, the first vision 2033, which seeks to make a positive impact as this university celebrated its centenary. We seek to make a positive impact in society through creating and advancing global knowledge, which has been our raison d'etre as a university. As a university, therefore, strives as part of its next century to maintain and further improve on its position as a leader in the Global South, being an interlocutor between the Global South and the Global North, using its locale in Johannesburg as a vantage point. We hope and seek to serve as a hub of knowledge for the continent to advance inclusive and sustainable futures for all, while also, of course, being at the leading edge of innovation in the global, of innovation and global excellence in the Global South, which has been what the university has all been about in the last 100 years. Therefore, to this effect, we are, as an institution, including centers of excellence like Clear AA, are committed to using our knowledge for the advancement of our community, city, country, continent, indeed the planet. Monitoring and evaluation as a truly multidisciplinary level field with its foundation in sociology, psychology, development studies, economic sciences, etc., is an ideal fit for VET's vision to cultivate multidisciplinarity in finding solutions to the major challenges we confront as humanity and our planet. Clear AA, therefore, is a unique and privileged position to contribute to the multiple challenges posed by the global climate crisis. Its history of success in supporting governments across more than 10 countries in Anglophone Africa, together with the GEI, its sister centers and development partners such as UNICEF, World Food Programme, and others across this and other continents, has created a sense of trust in the value that it provides in strengthening the capacities for decision makers, policy makers, and development practitioners to produce and use evidence towards shifting our world on its path of regression away from attaining the SDGs. However, we can course correct and strive and push towards a prosperous, sustainable future for our people and the planet. However, major changes are needed in our world, particularly in the way in which existing power differentials globally are impacting on poorer nations. These have historical antecedents, and it is critically important that we get the balance right between learning from the past and not get stuck where we are now. A collective process of acknowledging the past, how it connects to the present, must take us to the point of healing and repair so that we can collectively secure a future, an inclusive future that is beneficial for all the inhabitants of this fragile world. We can no longer ignore the interlocking and intersectionality of crises and the solutions therein, and the nexus between the human and the natural systems. The importance of engaging in transformation evaluation is part of acknowledging these intersectionalities and points of nexus. Roughly 15 years ago, Made in Africa evaluation was conceptualized and discussed at the 4th International Conference of the African Evaluation Association, or AFRIA, in Niamey, Niger. A few years later, in 2012, the African Thought Leaders Forum on Evaluation for Development was held in Bellagio, Italy, with Clear AA as a convening partner. So this talks about now equal partnerships in an unequal world in the kind of post-decolonial world order and world intellectual space we seek to achieve. The whole aim of this was to encourage fresh thinking in support of the Made in Africa approach to evaluation of programs being established by AFRIA. It arose from the realization that ongoing emphasis on building and strengthening evaluation capacity on the continent without promoting new thinking about evaluation theory and practice will eventually impoverish the profession and the practice on this continent. This lack of thought leadership in evaluation in Africa has to be addressed. To date, evaluation innovations in Africa have been rare or largely invisible in shaping national, regional, and global evaluation thinkings and processes. In that regard, I'd like to take a quote from the foreword to the Bellagio Forum report penned by Zenda Ofir, who is with us today. And also joining the panel is Professor Bagele Chilisa from the University of Botswana, who played a pivotal role in writing the discussion paper on the Made in Africa evaluation for the Bellagio engagement. Indeed, there are many other seminal pieces of indigenous knowledge system, decolonial research and evaluation over the years. It will be a privilege indeed to be able to hear from them today. The second edition of the African Evaluation INDABA, hosted by CLEAR AA, coincides with the 10th anniversary of the African Thought Leaders Forum on Evaluation. Hence, the title of today's webinar, it is a fitting curtain raiser that sets the tone for the INDABA as a whole, which is focused on the critical conversations that are needed to address the challenges facing the continent that I've raised before, particularly around evaluation and gender, climate change, transformation, social justice, and equity in an unequal world. Therefore, as I close, the Niamey meeting and the Bellagio Forum were instrumental in laying the foundation for the articulation of the Made in Africa Evaluation, MAE, paradigm and the broader efforts in indigenizing evaluations on the continent. It is my hope that this INDABA positions itself as an honor to realize the efforts of transforming evaluation practices to employ equity, social justice, and addressing the inequalities that we've spoken about. Indeed, those present in these engagements alongside CLEAR AA and its partners can work together in a collective effort towards transforming evaluation practices, transform the continent, and for the world for the better, and ensuring that there is shared prosperity and sustainability for the world. I thank you.
A warm round of virtual applause for Professor Vilakazi. Thank you so much, Prof. I think those words perfectly set the tone for the INDABA. Thank you so much for making sure that our eyes are cast on the current crises, as you said, the intersectional crises of the Anthropocene, which we can't ignore. Particularly as evaluators, we sometimes stand a bit of a distance from the real work, boots on the ground work, so to speak, that's happening in programs. And that is sometimes some of the challenges we sit with, is how do we then use the evidence from monitoring and evaluation in a way that enables decision-making to have an impact on those programs and on those policies. So thank you for reminding us of where our focus should be. So thank you so much. At this point, Prof, we do know that your schedule is very tight and very full. You are welcome to stay for as long as you can. We are now shifting gears to the moment where we are able to listen to the panelists. So please do exit whenever you need to, or stay around for as long as you wish. Thank you so much. Off that inspiring keynote remarks from Prof. Vilakazi, which was a perfect tone setter for today's session. We are so happy and excited to have our panelists with us today. Professor Bagele Chilisa from University of Botswana, Professor Zenda Ofir from MasterCard Foundation, Professor Ian Goldman, with your many hats, President of International Evaluation Academy, CLEAR AA Advisor, Adjunct Professor at UCT, and Jennifer Mutua, Founder and former Chair of the Evaluation Society of Kenya. A warm welcome to yourselves as panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today. So we have a very interesting discussion, which the VC just touched on, to say that it's 10 years after the Bellagio gathering. But in fact, when we had a conversation, framing the session a couple of days back, we realized that Bellagio was only one of other moments in time And so even though we are celebrating the anniversary of the Bellagio gathering today, I'm sure that we're going to be talking about some of the other historical moments in the development of the Made in Africa evaluation discourse. And the question and the conversation today is about how far have we come and what more needs to get done. Certainly, we would like to have a conversation today. So we are going to have our panelists talking to us and answering some key questions for about 30, 35 minutes. And then yourselves as participants, you are going to be invited to join in the dialogue and join in the conversation. So please do stick around, ask your questions over Twitter, in the chat box, and we will certainly try to cover as many as possible. I'm going to kick this off with asking a key question of Professor Chilisa. So, Prof. Chilisa, you've written extensively about Made in Africa evaluation. We know that you wrote the seminal paper that was discussed at the Bellagio Forum, but you also have some critique for us as practitioners and scholars in this space. There seems to be this tension between, have we moved far, or have we, is there a nascency in the discourse on Made in Africa evaluation? And what are some of the key events that we need to be looking back on and taking into consideration before we are quick to judge and say we haven't moved much? Prof. Chilisa, over to you. Chilisa, you are still on mute, just in case you are speaking to us already. We might be having a technical challenge, Prof. Chilisa. Let us know in the chat if you can hear us. And if not, we will try to see what we do in the background.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you so much, Prof.
Yes. I have 5 minutes to reflect on what you have said. But, I like projecting my slides because I speak in pictures. So can I?
Yes, please certainly do so.
Do you see them?
Not yet.
Can you see?
Not yet.
Okay, let me. Are you able to see?
Not yet, Prof.
How come?
So you did click on the share screen and you click on your screen?
They are on my screen.
Okay. So you've hit the share screen button as well.
I do what?
Share screen. The share screen button is the bottom of your screen. There's a green
yes.
You've done that.
But it's not.
It's just a technical challenge on our side. But why don't you go ahead and speak to your slides? In the meanwhile, I can ask the people in the background to just try to see if there's any settings we need to change.
I've lost you now. I can't see you.
We can see your name. Yeah.
I can't see anybody now.
It may be that the slides are uploading slowly. Sometimes that happens. The upload is very slow.
Anyway, I'll do it without my slides if that is what it is doing. Now, the thing is, I can't see anybody. I don't know when my Zoom.
We're all here listening to, so if you need us to give you verbal yeses, we shall do so.
Okay, so I'm just going to speak from with you not seeing what I have, but basically the question is, where are we after the Bellagio conference, after the Niamey conference in 2007, followed by Bellagio? And basically my answer is that we have moved forward a lot. We have moved forward a lot. We have done a lot. Following the Bellagio conference, one of the most important outcome of the African thought leadership was their commissioning, or Afria's commissioning, of a paper on the Made in Africa evaluation approach, which was supposed to be a synthesis paper on what Made in Africa evaluation should mean and how we should move forward. So I happen to be very lucky indeed to write that synthesis paper. And in that synthesis paper, I basically defined Made in Africa evaluation as an umbrella name for approaches, frameworks, models, and evaluation methods that are guided by the diverse philosophies, cultures, values, histories, languages, and experiences and practices of the African people. And as we moved on trying to define the Made in Africa evaluation, we said it is also an evaluation approach that has a decolonization intent. As I defined the Made in Africa evaluation in the synthesis paper, I made it a point to show that evaluation in Africa, there have been scholars, many scholars have been writing about how to carry out evaluation from an Afrocentric perspective. So the Made in Africa evaluation, we should not see it as writings that are beginning after the Niamey conference, but we should see it as a point at which we assembled all the writings, most of the writings that had been done, and the practice of evaluation from a Made in Africa, from an African-rooted perspective. So in that synthesis paper, I also drew a tree, which I said would perhaps be carrying, at that point was carrying some of the voices on how best to carry evaluation that is rooted in African worldviews. And amongst those, of course, was Asante, who in 1987 wrote about a cultural specific worldview that he called the Afrocentric paradigm that draws from African philosophies. And he said that you could apply this Afrocentric paradigm to evaluation, and it would inform three basic beliefs that should guide evaluation. That is, one, responsibility of evaluators to uncover hidden racist ideologies embedded in current practices and methodologies, and two, the belief that we should legitimize centrality of African ideals and values as valid frames of reference, and three, to always maintain inquiry rooted in strict interpretation of place. And of course, following that, and following the synthesis paper, which a review showed that the synthesis paper on the Made in Africa evaluation that tried to summarize African thought on evaluation at that time, which was 2014, thereabout. That paper is not well known, is not well read, and there was a recommendation that that synthesis paper should be made available, and perhaps find a way of ensuring that it is read, so that people can be exposed to the many other writings on evaluations that do not come, that that most of the time we forget about them. And when you talk about Made in Africa evaluation, most of the time you are saying, what are the principles of the Made in Africa evaluation? As if a Made in Africa evaluation is an approach. Of course, some people take it as an approach. I don't take it as an approach. I take it as an umbrella name for the various approaches and frameworks and ways of doing evaluation that include even new tools, indigenous tools that claim that evidence is better when they are used. But what is important, a milestone, a milestone, of course, has been the African evaluation principles, which I want to say that it is important that every evaluator in Africa also makes sure that they are aware of these evaluation principles, because the evaluation principles were also informed by the world views and philosophies of the African people. There are 5. One talks about evaluation that empowers participants through new insights. The second one talks about technical, robust, and cultural responsive evaluation. The third one talks about respect. And the fourth about Afrocentric. And then the last one, which I'm now going to dwell on, talks about interdependency and connectedness. In talking about interdependency and connectedness, we are saying that we cannot, my interpretation of that is that we cannot talk of Made in Africa evaluation. We cannot talk about African evaluation approaches and frameworks without placing them in the larger context of how people view evaluation. And when we talk about that, we go back again to the time around 2010, around the Bellagio conference time, when Alkin came up with the evaluation tree that has 3 branches: the methods, the use, and the value branch. And we have moved forward in the sense that I for one has said, okay, we have this tree. Where do we place ourselves as Africans? And as I talk today, I received a request from some people that are writing about evaluation and thinking of evaluation the way Zenda would think about it, thinking of evaluation, that as we think of evaluation, we can think of our different approaches as trees that are in a forest. You can think of a forest. Now, these people wrote to me and said to me, okay, tell us where you think you would fit in the evaluation forest. They talked of a forest. And I thought that was a landmark in the Made in Africa evaluation, because I thought that maybe my name popped out because of what I've written and what we have written. Most of us have written about the Made in Africa evaluation as a tree that can be part of the evaluation forest. And the question was, now, what do I have to say is the purpose of evaluation? And from my perspective, and there will be different perspectives coming from Africa. My perspective, the branch that I want to move forward is that evaluation should, the purpose of evaluation should be to ensure that context, to ensure that the evaluation is done in context, the emphasis on context and the emphasis on the aspirations of the African people and the emphasis on our worldview that sees the connection between people and the environment. To me, that is a branch that I'm pushing and that will emphasize that given funder colonialism, we have to pay attention to the aspiration of the beneficiaries. There's so much emphasis on program, to improve the program, to make decisions, people to participate in the program. For me, it is about evaluation that will reveal the aspirations of the people. This philanthropy program that was brought to the people, is it a program that meets their needs and their priorities? Does the evaluation show whether the program is in harmony with not only social justice, but environmental justice? So in a way, yes, we are moving forward, and we cannot avoid placing ourselves in the context of the international debate. Right now, that tree left us out, and now we are being invited. We are being invited to say, okay, where would you fit you? So this is where we are as part of the international evaluation community. We have to contribute, and we are contributing. The Made in Africa evaluation has made a big impact, and people are listening to what we are saying. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Chilisa. It's always, again, challenging us to think, I think, more critically around when we talk about these subjects. And I think you just very perfectly raised, again, that challenge of saying the purpose of evaluation. And I loved your evaluation tree, which I have seen a couple of days ago with that new branch, and having us look at what is the African roots and the African tree that is different to perhaps the Euro-Western version of the theory tree that we are all so used to. I'm going to turn to the panelists, to the fellow panelists now, to reflect on what Prof. Chilisa has said, and maybe Zenda, start with you.
Yeah, I would like to, of course, echo what Bagele has said and add a small addition. And that is that we actually do need to celebrate what has been achieved. And I just want to remind us of the conferences that have highlighted these, the INDABA being one of them, that have highlighted this field of work, the African Evaluation Journal, the African Evaluation Principles that Bagele referred to, and research and scholars that are being very much engaging with this kind of work, young and wiser alike. But we do lack something that is more influential, more systematic, and that have a stronger influence on progress. Because as Professor Vilakazi said, we live in times that need urgent solutions. We need to believe that evaluation and evaluative practices in general can add to the solutions that we need. And we know that our practice as currently done has enormous weaknesses. And therefore it is essential to bring African perspectives and African ideas to the fore. I would like later on, maybe Candice, when we talk about perhaps a bit more about progress made and what can be done, I'd like to add to this because I think there's quite a bit that I'd like to address about where we've come, why we haven't gone further, and what that might mean for us going forward in practice. Because I think we want to know what to do in practice. And my last point about this matter, before I hand over to the other panelist, is just, please let us not fool ourselves. A lot has been said about what to do in practice. how to move this field forward, we have not only the 2007 Yami conference, we have the Bellagio that was quite focused on how to turn a theory into practice, and also articles by, for example, Oladayo Omusa in the African Development Bank's journal, as well as the recent AEJ journals, many of whom talk about concepts, but also address what need to be done in practice. So let us just think about that as we move forward with our discussion in the next few minutes.
Thanks, Zenda. And we certainly are looking forward to that second question where you'll be talking to us about how, moving forward. Jennifer, any reflections on what Bagele shared with us?
Yes, thank you very much, Candice. And thanks, Prof, for a very insightful presentation. At the time of the Bellagio and following, I was actually a board member at Ofir, and I was in the team that was spearheading the Made in Africa initiative, which was quite nascent at the time. The other team members were the former president, Nermin from Egypt, and the former Secretary General Gado. And one of the key issues at the time was the seemingly lack of common understanding what the Made in Africa was about and what it could do and what it can do. And I remember, for example, during the Ofir conference of 2013 in Yaoundé and even the Samia of 2013, which I attended, there were there seemed to have been different perspectives on what this initiative was really about. And people were not that very enthusiastic for just the lack of common understanding. And so when Zenda and Prof say that a lot of progress has been made, I think that is really very commendable, because it means that there has been more awareness and understanding and unpacking of what this really culturally responsive evaluation is about. And it also happened that at the time, the evaluation practice in general was really weak. It still is weak in the continent, but I remember at the time there was a lot of fear that it is about investigation, it is about policing, it is about mob lynch. And since then, 10 years down the line, there has been a lot of...
Depuis ce temps-là, nous avons remarqué, yes, c'est l'interprète.
Have just okay, thank you. Carry on, Jennifer. Apologies about that.
10 years down the line, given the context then and today, I think there is a lot of appreciation of the great potential that evaluation has to transform the continent. And I think it is a most strategic moment, for the evaluation practice, and in particular with a special focus of the Made in Africa. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer, for that. I think it really helps to also understand, as you've, spoken to us about the journey, having been there at the very beginning. I think it is a critical challenge for us about, that question about what more needs to be done is really the big question, I guess, and we'll get to it in the course of the conversation. Ian, your thoughts on Bagele's notes or reflections?
I think, I was just reading the Bellagio document again this morning, and I just really impressed by the quality of thinking, and congrats, Bagele's and the others who were there. I wasn't there. It was really clear thinking, and Bagele, really enjoying again your paper there for that. I just feel, reading it, I feel a bit disappointed that we haven't gone further. Because I think, what just strikes me is the immensity of the crises which face us, which reflect the fact that we haven't managed to create a way of doing development which values the planet, which values other humans, and African ways of knowing and being allow for that in a much stronger way than Western ways. And so we've got some very, very fundamental rethinking that we have to do about everything, to be honest. Our current development trajectory is leading us to destruction. We are likely to have as some people have said, this is the coolest year you'll ever live. This is also the most stable year you'll ever live. It goes downhill from here. So we have to take these approaches much, much more seriously. And I think a lot of the solutions for the world come from African and other indigenous ways of thinking, knowing and being. So a lot more work to be done.
I think that's a perfect segue to hearing from Zenda again, and waiting bated breath on what you have to share. I think you made a very intriguing statement about what have we moved forward, have we made progress? Zenda, over to you.
I actually want to link on to what Ian just said. So there are some things that we perhaps don't know and maybe we forget. Number one, and I really want us to internalize the following points. There are no more such things as developed and developing countries. The so-called developed countries have led the world down a path of destruction, primarily because relationships between us, as Ian said, and relationships with the earth have been neglected. We call that reductionist thinking, and it's come from dominant narratives that we've been told over the last 100 or 150 years about how the world works and what is good and what is not. And we are now in a space where all of these narratives are proven to have been false. That means that all countries now develop, all of us, because none of us have a solution to the crises that face us in terms of climate change especially, but also the poly crisis, the confluence of aggression towards one another, pollution, and many other inequality and all of that. So there is no need to look up to anyone else for answers about how to do things. We need to draw from what is the best around the world and rooted in being African and what our own philosophies and our own ways of work tell us, take the best from there and craft something that we can use for the future, also in evaluation. It means taking the best from ourselves and the best from others and trying to use that for our own benefit and for the benefit of the world. This implies that we need to look far more towards countries and societies who have developed in ways that we can learn from. And this really urges us to look towards the global south, not always towards the global north, in finding solutions and doing evaluation in ways that are different. And especially in our own development and evaluating our own development, finding impressive, very impressive lessons from the global south about how change really works, how transformation really works in contexts like ours. We sometimes do not recognize that the whole notion of systems thinking that is now so prevalent and so dominant everywhere suddenly perhaps after the SDGs, which said that we need to think in systems and we need to think about transformation. And with COVID, this became very clear because we suddenly saw the interconnectedness and interdependencies of everything. We forget that systems thinking has been part of societies thinking around the world for thousands of years. And the most extreme examples of good development and transformative development in the world comes from such societies that have not taken on all of the ways of dominant voices and theories about how things need to be done. Systems thinking is embedded in indigenous work, in African thinking, and in Eastern thinking. We also need to recognize that there really are very big differences between societies. And there are wonderful books written primarily about, let's say, the difference between East Asia and Africa and the West. And we need to interrogate very deeply our own philosophies in Africa. We have Ubuntu, but there are also many other philosophies that are often displayed in metaphors that we need to engage with. I ask my African evaluation colleagues whether they understand and know African philosophies, African prime thinkers over the last 100 years, and very seldom anyone can quote and have a discussion about their philosophies, their ways of thinking. And also the understanding of our history in Africa and what that may mean for all of us, which is why the decolonization debates are so important. And the movement about decolonization in the world is so critical for us to engage in. When I look at, and I'm just quickly referring, we need to engage with really deep thinking about what is different about being African and how that will impact on evaluative work. And some writings have appeared, but I'm going to quote quickly from East Asia, the difference between East Asia and the Anglo-West, that's the US and the UK and Australia. And analyses have shown, for example, and I want you to think about the implications of this kind of thinking for evaluation and where Africa may be in these kind of issues. For example, Eastern people are more inclined to seek compromise and consensus, a middle way, by the way, Africans in the old days too. While in the West, people are more inclined to insist on the correctness of one belief versus the other. You are with us or against us. We are good, you are not good. Very big difference when it comes then to negotiation, to finding solutions, and for evaluative practice. Strive for interpersonal societal harmony in the East, while in the West, people are more concerned with knowing themselves and prepared to sacrifice societal harmony. Again, when we evaluate what are the values within which not only our processes are conducted, but our solutions and our ideas of change are situated. Again, quoting, this is Nesbitt, by the way, The Geography of Thought in 2004. In East Asia, they avoid controversy and debate. They equate silence, not speech, with knowledge. In the West, Anglo-West, have faith in argumentation, right? That is why our laws and science is very different. And in initial embeddedness in our societies. In the East, they value success and achievement because it reflects well on the group they belong to. In the Anglo-West, they value success and achievement as badges of personal merit. Very, very different than when you think about what success would look like if you have to evaluate in these contexts. So in the East, they value fitting in and engage in self-criticism to make sure that they do fit in. While in the West, they value individuality and strive to make themselves look good. In the East, there is no strong cultural obligation to feel special or unusually talented. While in Anglo-West, there is a push to feel good about oneself. I highlight this because I think we need to think very carefully about what African societal culture would be given these kind of differences between Anglo-West and East, and then think what the implications might be for our practice. And just finally, having and cultivating a pride in our own, a confidence in our own, is necessary, but what is also essential is leadership. And I want to commend CLEAR for its leadership. But I think one of the biggest problems we have is we don't have collective leadership that can change the system within which evaluation in Africa is done. We know the political constraints of funders that work in a specific way, and we are really requiring to try to work together with everybody to try to change it. And later on, if there's still a moment, we can discuss a very famous paper that we all should be acquainted with, the 6 Conditions for Systems Change, that has been written by John Kanya, Peter Senge, and Mark Kramer. They're all from the West, and they've tried very true and good things. And they say that in order to change systems, you need 6 conditions. You need to change the policies, the practices, the resource flows, the power dynamics, the relationships, and most importantly, the mindsets. And we have not done enough to do those 6 things. And that is our challenge, because we need to help shift the system through which evaluation in Africa is done. Thank you, Candice.
Thanks, Zenda. And I think that so many comments are coming through. I think people are really engaging. I think it's resonating with people what we're talking about. I've seen all the comments all of a sudden come through. And while I give Bagele, Ian, and Jennifer a moment to just digest what you've said, maybe let me just read some of the comments coming through, and you can hear kind of where the thing or where the room is going. So Haley Tay is saying most international organizations and donors are led by Western theories of evaluation. How can a Made in Africa evaluation approach be mainstreamed in international organizations and donors working in Africa? So that is a pivotal question. That is, I guess, the question that we are engaging with and ruminating about all the time. How do we change? And I think some of what you've spoken about, Zenda, talks to that. And we've got Julius Obura. Hi, everyone. My name is Julius Obura, member of Evaluation Society of Kenya. As we talk about climate change and the world crisis, which action have we put in place as evaluators to also have an impact on the climate crisis? Which projects are we undertaking to help society in this major world crisis? And I think this points again to the sense that evaluation is sort of separate from or ignorant of, you know, the current crises, and how do we make sure that we don't stand apart from those? And I think that's a great question, and what all of us must reflect on. Bagele, there are 2 very, very long comments here, very thoughtful comments. Just in the interest of time, I won't read them right now, but maybe put them in the chat box as well. But just as an appreciation for your insights on your, on Made in Africa evaluation and the connection between people and environment. There is a question about expounding more on paying attention to evaluation beneficiaries, which would expedite the utility of evaluation results to African people embedded on your new evaluation grant. Just think that is an appreciation of that fee, which I think is really something that we need to, communicate more to others, to say that there's a different way of looking at these. Now that we've heard what's coming from the room, perhaps I can go back to you, Bagele, just reflect on some of what Zenda's spoken about. What are your thoughts? Bagele, I hope you can still hear us. Here we go.
Yes, thank you very much. Zenda's thoughts resonate with my thinking. I was very much interested in the differences in thoughts between an Asian view and a view, the opposite view, which is Western. But I do think that a lot has already been written in contrasting Western thought with African thought. There has been a lot written about how Africans, for example, think in terms of I-we and I-we relationship as opposed to an I-you relationship. And I know that some people have even taken that I-we relationship, which comes from the Ubuntu worldview or Ubuntu philosophy. They've taken that and tried to show how it can be used in evaluating interventions, how it can be used in leadership, promoting good leadership, and so on. So I think that sometimes we undervalue ourselves, or we really do not push forward what we already know about ourselves. So I would say that there is need of us selling what we have. A lot has already been written, but the point is that a lot of what has been written about our philosophies and how they influence or inform what we do and how we do it, a lot is still not sold out there for people to know and understand. And I would say, let's push what we know already about ourselves and how it helps us do things. And even the systems theory that we talk about, the connectedness of the environment with the people. That is built on our philosophy of Ubuntu, the I-we relationship. I hate to talk about system thinking as if it's a Western thought. So I'm hungry to talk about system thinking from an African perspective and give it that African perspective, what shall I call it? Name it as an African system thinking that is coming from Africa. Name it in such a way that it remains embedded in African philosophies and worldviews. Because I'm afraid if we're going to start talking system theory written by these Western scholar who came up with system theory, and how I want us to talk about African connectedness and relatedness as a kind of system theory that informs how we do things in Africa, and that others can also borrow and see how they can address climate change. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bagele. And I think a lot of what you're saying is answering or almost, I almost wish we were in the same physical space together, because there's a conversation going on in the chat that's really touching on the issues that you are raising here as well. And I'm going to turn to Jennifer and Ian to sort of touch on the third question, and at the same time kind of respond also somewhat to what Zenda reflected on, which is the question around what needs to be done, what is yet not done, or what must we focus on moving forward. Maybe Ian, we can start with you.
Okay, and I am going to try and share a screen. If let me just get my presentation up, because I have a diagram too, which I think is helpful. Let me get into presentation mode. There we go. So So the first thing for me is we've got, I mean, the development trajectory that we're on is a trajectory to disaster. We've been seduced to think that growth and consumption will lead us to happiness, and it's leading us to disaster. And the rich will manage the disaster better than the less rich. So the paradigm is really, really shot, and we have to do something about that. Otherwise, there is no future for our children. And in doing that development differently, I think one of the issues is we've got to understand and look at how power is being exercised. That's power within our countries, it's power between the North and the South, it's power between the private sector and government, etc., etc. If we're naive about power, then the resources will carry on being sucked up to the top 1%. And I think there's been some really powerful things which Bagele and Zenda have talked about the difference between focusing on individual versus community, moving from a competition paradigm, which is very much an Anglo-Saxon one, towards a collaboration paradigm, which is much more African and much more indigenous. And the whole thing about valuing the past, the present, and the future, Bagele expresses it beautifully in the Bellagio paper there. And the fact of valuing human and non-human, and recognizing that it's only through valuing nature as a whole that we have a chance of survival. And very much growth for whom? So growth as it's currently being is just sucked up to the top 1% and creating enormous crises in the process. So we have to do development differently. And that means us thinking about our planning, our programming, our projects or whatever, and, you know, as well as the way we work in our organization. And that's the second point I want to raise. We have to question the way we work from a linear mechanistic approach, very much around individuals, to a much more complex, organic and relational way of running organizations, of building collaborations, of partnerships. And we need to express that in the language we use as well. And I'm going to come back to that. In fact, no, I'll do it right now. Just yesterday, Candice and Bagele are part of, on the board of the International Evaluation Academy, and Zenda has been a major contributor there as well. And just yesterday, we were talking about how, at our board meeting, how we need to decolonize language and move from the words that are used in the traditional colonial, military, industrial, mechanistic terminology towards words which are much more organic. And these were some words which Michael Quinn Patton came up with sort of on the spur of the moment yesterday. But we're thinking about, even in doing our planning as an academy, how we can think of it in a different way and try to express ourselves in a very different way. So we need to use this in the language we use. And one of the problems with language is that some of the M&E which is happening is very much what I would call M&E of the past, not M&E of the future. And we need to become masters of cutting edge M&E, not the mechanistic compliance M&E of the past, which is all about control. And so, you know, we have to be very careful. We have to build our skills and our thinking about how to move beyond targets as these punitive things that we have to achieve, you know, towards direction indicators, which give us an indicator of the direction we want to take. And so, for example, in the academy too, in our strategic planning, we're trying to use them. So we've got some indicators there, but we're using them as direction indicators, not as targets that we have to bang ourselves on the back if we haven't achieved. And similarly then for innovation, I mean, I think Bagele also argues very powerfully about merit and worth for whom. How does that come through? So is it merit or whom for bureaucrats, or is it merit and worth for the communities, the farmers, the people living with HIV, etc., at the bottom, whose lives we are hoping will improve? And how is that then reflected in the way programs or plans are developed and in the way we do our evaluations? Then the second thing is innovating towards relevant approaches and systems, away from an RBME sort of compliance mindset towards an adaptive management mindset, which is very related to the local context and is built on the stakeholders that are living in that context, and a context which has to adapt to a very difficult future. And then innovating in how we address context, how we build in relationships, how we build in that relationship to other people, the relationship to the rest of nature in the way that we work and how we deal with crises. And Julius raised the question in his in the Q&A. And so, for example, with Samir, what we're doing is we've taken the 6 DAC criteria and said these are not good enough. We need a criteria around climate and ecosystems health, and we need a criteria around transformative equity, or we will not address the crises that we're facing. We will deal with the plumbing, and we won't deal with the fact that the house is actually falling down. So we've developed these two criteria and guidelines, and they are being tested at the moment in South Africa on 3 evaluations, and those will be issued by DPME to become standard guidelines that are applied across the country. So there's an example of where we're taking locally based knowledge, locally based experience, testing it out locally in our local context, and building new ways of doing M&E, and people around the world are looking at it. So those are some ideas.
Thanks very much, Ian. Jennifer, if I could turn on your thoughts, and all panelists, if you have a look at the very, very vibrant chat box, you'll see that quite a conversation is going on. I'm loving that. So please do continue doing that to all participants. Of course, we won't be able to read all of these out there. They're so rich. And we're going to have to think about what we do with these conversations and not just leave them here. But Jennifer, your thoughts?
Thank you. I really do agree with Ian, with Zenda, that indeed we are living in unusual times, and that we must have an approach that is no business as usual. And I think one of the great values we have in Africa is that of working for the collective good. And to me, I think the times present us with a challenge to go back to the drawing board about collective good. And collective good, to me, means that we really must go the extra mile of thinking about my brother, of thinking about my sister, the continent, you know, groaning with the great stresses of the times. You get the sense that the silo mentality that has characterized much of our M&E, including at the national level, must really come to an end. For example, when you look at the national level, they are very encouraging or very promising data systems. For example, by the National Bureaus of Statistics, by the research think tanks, and you know, the government administrative data systems. However, these systems do not speak to one another. There is no coordinated and harmonized approach. And I think the challenges of the time call us to get together to see how we may move. And to me, it is time to move more fully to the aspirations of the Made in Africa. I remember one of the key aspirations was really to have an African-rooted curriculum, you know, that was based on the context and the needs of the continent, and also a research agenda that also focused on the African needs. And I think one of the key way forwards is to see how we get that moving. How do we get the research institutions do their thing and have that linkage with the African Evaluation Journal? Because at the time, you know, one of the key gaps was that of publication, that many African evaluators did not feel that they had the confidence or what it takes to publish quality work. And so I think more focus on those aspirations, doing research that is Africa rooted, research that is going to be publicized to the world, and also taking into account that the local evaluators do need affirmative action. Many of them are not able to get jobs, you know, particularly the consultancies. So, and the young and emerging ones also don't get opportunities. And we all know that the evaluation function has been left behind. So I think going forward, we need to have that systems approach, you know, more coordination, more harmony. And as we do that, also taking into account that the communities are being left behind. They would play a key role, to me, I think, if they had more empowerment on what exactly monitoring and evaluation is and what role they could do towards making their contributions, including holding the government to account at a time when we know that governance is a big issue, not only here in Africa, but globally. And I think also most importantly, the VOPEs, you know, the professional networks have been left behind. When it comes to individual capacities, there is appreciation that indeed there has been concerted efforts by multi-stakeholder effort, support, and we now have critical mass of evaluators who possess a lot of theory, you know, of M&E. However, translating that into practice remains a challenge because the institutional capacities, for example, in the national systems are weak. And so they are not able to apply the skills that they have learned. And the VOPEs also, they are mostly working on voluntary basis, you know, like in Kenya, for example, the Evaluation Society of Kenya, all the board members, apart from myself, have 8 to 5 jobs. And yet we are expected, you know, to drive that agenda with so much public expectation. So I think going forward, there is need to focus on the VOPEs to strengthen their capacities, because they are the vehicle, I think, that are best suited to drive the Made in Africa agenda at the national level as they work in collaborations with the national M&E systems. I think I will pause there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I think the very practical direction that you're taking us in is what a lot of people have questioned us at ClearA about, for example, as well. You know, when we go into knowledge production, such as the special edition, or when we have webinars such as these, I think the question we always get asked that, yes, you're having the conversation, but what needs to be done? So I think that definitely resonates with people who are seeking to say, you know, what can we do, and where are these challenges in the most practical sense. And a lot of it is coming through in the chats as well. And just before I turn to your fellow panelists on, you know, some of those practical considerations, and also Ian, your presentation, just to read again, to see what's happening in the chat. I think Sonal mentioned something very, very interesting. Sonal Zaveri from India, the co-chair of Zenda Plus and coordinator of the Zenda and Equity Network South Asia Densa. And Sonal is saying that this discussion resonates with our own in South Asia, that we have a different worldview, and the challenge is translating that into evaluative practice. We recently published a set of papers reflecting on evaluation theory and practice from South Asia, and conceptually framed our unique approach to evaluation as local wisdom. So I'm loving that whole language. I think it speaks to what you were speaking to, Ian. How do we change the language that it's not mission, vision, strategy, plan? And I think that whole nomenclature of local wisdom speaks to that. There is a very interesting question in the chat, in the Q&A, which Zenda is for you. I'm literally just picking on questions because there are so many. It's from Dominic. Dominic's saying, hi, Professor Ofir, thank you for such a wonderful summary of Western, Eastern, and African way of life, worldviews, etc. But I have a few questions. What do you think about someone who thinks that the Eastern values and African values you listed are not really the main driving factors anywhere in Africa anymore, because the whole world is affected by globalization? Which part of Africa is not affected by Western and Eastern religions, for example? Which part of Africa is immune to technology? Which African group of people is 100% based on Ubuntu, given the levels of crime, xenophobia, racism, etc., in both rural and urban areas of Africa? So a bit of a challenge there to the whole question of African worldviews. Over to you, Zenda.
I think that's exactly our challenge. And the challenge is very significant because most of the highly educated intellectuals or experts or specialists in Africa have been educated in the West. And that does mean that we are lucky because we can draw the best of what is in the West. But it also means that colonized thinking and mindsets still frame much of how we think about, for example, how development works, how change works, the kind of values that should drive not only what we are, but how we think about development and about evaluation. And this is why I think it's imperative for all of us to engage with the debates and writings that are currently coming out, but also that came out 60, 70 years ago when Africa decolonized physically, because there were a lot of thinkers and writers since that time that wrote about what African society should reflect and can reflect, and the role that we can play in the world. So that's a major challenge in front of us. And yes, you are right, cultures blend when they mix and when they're exposed to others. And they evolve. Some evolve in good ways and some ways are not good. If we have strong leadership, they can help us cultivate the good values and get rid of the bad. And one good example is what has happened in Rwanda after the genocide more than 20 years ago. If you go to Rwanda, no society is perfect. But when you look at what they've built and the values that they've tried to cultivate as a cohesive nation, one that focuses on building and developing, it reflects strong leadership and education systems that guide that kind of focus. We don't have that. As you point out, Dominique, we need to do a lot of work to try to understand what is it that we are thinking about that may not be appropriate. And that's been embedded in us through dominant narratives and the media and the education system, even religion, that may not be appropriate. And for that, we really do need to turn to the South. We really need to turn to indigenous thinking and to the global South, because these are the other ways of thinking and knowing and doing that have been suppressed and made to feel inferior. And yet there have been tremendous success stories that are largely ignored by mainstream narratives that one can look at and learn from. And I think it is our biggest challenge, is to do that and apply it in practice. And I just want to finally, because our time is running out at my end, get a word in for the foundation that I've joined full-time for some years, 2 years now. And that is that they are really seriously in the impact work, in the evaluative work, looking to how to embed Made in Africa evaluation in what is done. So there are more and more of these examples that we can turn to and engage with, but it is still an uphill battle against the powerful financing and policy establishment in evaluation and in development.
Thank you so much, Zenda. And true to form, we've run out of time in these conversations. It's actually making me think, and email me. A lot of you do have my email address. If you think that it would be useful for us to have maybe a quarterly reading and thinking group. I'm just looking at all of the conversations that are happening in the chat box, and I'm wondering whether there is a gap at the moment and a vacuum for us to have these conversations and to start doing the deep thinking and deep reading Even Zenda, what you were saying earlier on, do we understand who the African philosophers are? Maybe we can have some kind of momentum towards that, have something that we all collectively read and we engage about. Because I think that these webinars that are sparsely, peppered throughout the year, it's not sufficient. So please do email me if you think that's a good idea. I'm actually going to ask each panelist for a 30-second kind of parting message you want to give to people. Bagele, maybe if I could start with you. Do you have anything, final thoughts? Bagele, are you able to hear us? We're just asking for your 30-second parting thoughts.
Thank you so much. My takeaway is from Ian on decolonizing language. And when I leave here, I'm going to be thinking about a way of talking about naming systems thinking without calling system thinking, connectedness and relationship. That is a system thinking from an African perspective, and I shall so call it then from now on. Thank you.
I absolutely love that. Thanks, Bagele. Ian, your parting thoughts?
No, I think there's hope. And I think the sort of the work we're doing at Samir, the engagement we're having in the academy, I think gives us hope. The work that MasterCard wants to do, there's hope. But we must focus. The time is not with us. We must focus on making a difference quickly, not dragging it out.
Thanks, Ian. And Jennifer, your parting thoughts.
You're muted, Candice, and so is Jennifer. Okay.
Oh, Jennifer, go ahead.
I think, as I said earlier, evaluation is standing at the most strategic moment, the breakthrough moment, so to speak. And it is time to arise, to take advantage, to potentially contribute to transformative transformation for the continent, taking into account, I think that to be able to change the lives of 1.2 billion people is not a small task, and it cannot be business as usual. So for me, that is a takeaway.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you.
So that is the challenge.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Zenda, your parting thoughts.
I want to speak to the young people around this virtual table and challenge you to commit yourselves to making sure that your mind is open to other ways of thinking, other ways of doing, to learning, to reading, to being proud and confident that we have something to offer from Africa, but then commit to really make informed choices to contribute in theory to theory and to practice, and to really work together, form leadership, be leaders, to take us forward collectively in ways that can really change the system within which we work. I know that is a big ask, but I don't see how else we will move forward. We need to collaborate among all of those who believe in the kinds of things we've been talking about. And I also look to Clear and others to take the leadership that is necessary collectively to move us forward in ways that are dynamic, urgent, intense, because that is what we need, as we've said during this hour and a half.
Thank you so much, Zenda. And the challenge is accepted, the mandate is accepted. I'm getting positive comments about that reading thinking group, so I'm certainly going to be emailing a few people about that. We can put something together. But Sia, over to you. You're going to be doing a closing thank you, vote of thanks, and take us to closing. Thank you so much for those who are still hanging around. We appreciate your time. Sia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Candice. Thank you very much to the VC, the principal, the speakers that have gone before, and the audience for joining this morning session. As you know, the conversations do not end here. The conversations will be going on until Thursday, the 25th of November. The sessions are structured, so we have a mix of morning and afternoon sessions, and mine is just to invite you to this afternoon's session titled Promoting Gender Mainstreaming in M&E Policies. The session has been scheduled to take place between 2 and 3:30 p.m. South African Standard Time, and I'd like to request everyone to join the afternoon sessions and register for them. And please continue to engage with us on the Twitter platform. Our account is @ClearAA1 and the hashtag is #Let's Talk Evaluation. So I'd like to urge everyone to interact with us and engage.